I want to start. Yes, thank you. Before we begin, I want to start by introducing briefly our project and the organization as well. For those of you who may not be very familiar with Aresia, we are a non-profit umbrella organization that has been providing support to the settlement and integration sector in Atlantic Canada for over 30 years. And we count more than 35 Anglophone and Francophone member organizations in the provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. Regarding the Migrant Worker Support Program funded by ESTC, our project is titled Better Together, and we have started implementing it in October 2022, and it has been extended until March 31st, 2026. We are partnering with 6 sub-agreement holders to support migrant workers and the 3 maritime provinces. So in New Brunswick, we are partners with Madhu Verma Migrant Justice Center and Miramichi Regional Multicultural Association. In Nova Scotia, we are partners with the Center for Migrant Worker Rights and YMCA of Greater Halifax and Dartmouth. And PEI, we are partners with Cooper Institute and West Prince Ventures Limited. And each of our sub-agreement holder has partnered with community-based organizations to conduct project activities and strengthen outreach and community engagement. I would like to share a quick glance of what our project has achieved up until October 2024. So our partners have provided awareness raising sessions to more than 7,000 migrant workers across the 3 maritime provinces, raising their awareness on their rights and responsibilities, developing resources and guides for migrant workers, sending announcements and sharing information through WhatsApp. They have been able to support direct services to more than 2,700 migrant workers and assisting them in complaints and filing complaints and applications for open work permit for vulnerable worker, in accessing health services, as well as providing legal information and support. And we have reached more than 1,700 migrant workers through social and community events. Before we move to the agenda items, we are very happy to have Raisa Marks with us today to moderate the webinar. With over 20 years in the nonprofit sector, Raisa is the founder and principal consultant of Lilymark, whose social purpose is to strengthen organization and support collaboration for change. She is a skilled facilitator with extensive experience leading diverse groups of people through consensus-based decision-making processes, and is a strategic thinker with experience in policy work at both the federal and provincial levels. Welcome, Raisa, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Étoile. Hi, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm happy to be here. So you can see the agenda on your screen. So we're doing the welcome and introductions now. Then we'll have a series of speakers. So we're going to hear from 3 speakers first, and then we'll have a short Q&A period. And then we'll do our last 2 speakers. I will introduce each speaker right before they speak. And then we'll have a second Q&A period after the last 2 speakers. And then we'll have breakouts. So you will have a chance to have some discussion, share your thoughts about what you heard in the presentations. And we have some discussion questions to prompt your discussion. So that will be happening later on after the speakers. And then we're going to wrap up by 3:45 Atlantic time. So we'll get right into it. Before we start with the introductions of the speakers, I want to just tell you a little bit about how the Q&As are going to work. So if you have a question as someone is talking, you can put it into the chat. So just type it into the chat and put who it's directed to. So put the speaker's name and then the question. Étoile will be gathering those and feeding them to me in an order that makes sense. And so then I will ask the questions based on that. So that's how we're going to do Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat and indicate who the question is for. So I think with that all being said, I will go ahead and introduce this first speaker, which is Dr. Raluca Bejan. who is an associate professor of social work at Dalhousie University in Halifax. Raluca has over 10 years experience conducting migration research and is a member of the migrant workers in the Canadian Maritime's research team. So over to you, Raluca.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I have to send a request to share it, it seems. Okay. Can you see my screen or no? No.
Not yet. You need to click on the share button, the green one, and select the screen option.
Yeah, so let me just I put desktop 1, so I'm just gonna put desktop 2. Still not, Etoile, you have the PowerPoint, so like I just don't want to spend the entire time trying to just share it. So maybe if it's fine for you to share it, I'm fine with that.
Yes, sure. Just I need a second just to.
Yeah, just because it doesn't work, and
Yes,
I'm not so
yes.
savvy with Zoom. I was in maternity leave when all this COVID and online stuff happened, so I feel like I never caught up with it. So
Okay.
I'm just a bit off all the
Sure.
time.
I'll share it now. Just confirm if you can see my screen. Can you all see my
I
screen?
can see your screen
Yep.
as well, yeah.
Great.
Okay, so basically what I meant to present today was on the unprotected labor in the Canadian Maritime. So I think that the sort of theoretical point that I would like to bring here is that labor market participation and employment trajectories tend to be very different for citizens compared to those with less secure immigration status. So if I was to ask the question of who has the right to have rights within a nation, definitely citizens will be sort of the first position on that, then permanent residents, followed by those with temporary work permits, and then undocumented people. So in a way, this can be understood in the classical economic sense through this sort of dual labor market theory, in which we say, well, we have this sort of like high skill level jobs, and then we have this junk jobs over here. So sort of like high skill versus low skill, but also through what some have called occupational segregation, when you have basically the low skilled people represented by women, minorities, immigrants, and so on and so forth. So oftentimes within the Canadian context, the focus on when we talk about labor market participation in the low sort of skilled jobs is very much tied in with people identitarian characteristics and citizenship as an act of stratification. It gets sort of obfuscated. If we go to the next slide, just to give you a little bit of a little bit of context on our work. So this sort of partnership has come to the end this year. Last year, we have produced, or this year, we have produced 4 reports. It was a partnership between Dalhousie University, St. Thomas University, and Cooper Institute, but we definitely connected with other actors as well, such as the UFCW, the Madhu Verna Center in New Brunswick. So we produced 1 report for PEI in 2021, 1 for New Brunswick in 2022, 1 for Nova Scotia in 2023, and another one was just out on permanent residence in PEI in June this year. And now I just want to give a brief overview on the numbers in the region. So on the next slide. So the temporary foreign workers, it's basically, in terms of the numbers, in 2020, there were around 120 something people in Canada, not that many right in the Maritimes, around 1,700 PI, close to 3,000 in New Brunswick, and over 3,000 in Nova Scotia. Now if we move the next slide for 2024, for 2023, you can see that the numbers have basically doubled within the next 2-3 years. So we can ask, why is this high increase? And of course, it's very much, the entire immigration system in a way works to sort of benefit the Canadian economy. So it's very much tied what happens in this program with what Canada as a nation state needs to perform competitively in the sort of like interconnected world of market economy. So the program is very much centered on catering to the economic needs of the Canadian nation state. So correspondingly, during this time, Canada actually had some of the some of the highest labor market needs. I think that they were sort of historically recorded. So I think in 2022, Canada had somewhere around 1 million job vacancies. So there was no coincidence that the number actually went really high in this program, because there was really a need for cheap labor in the country. Okay, so now if we go to the next slide, and then I know that people are also going to present on the other reports, so I'll focus a lot on the Nova Scotia context, although I will say that the low wage stream, which employs most of the seafood workers, specifically in New Brunswick, I think it's by far the worst. So the Nova Scotia context, the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program sort of, I would say, dominates. It's sort of like the majority of the workers, right, in the program are coming to the swap, which is a program that in which people have working permits for 8 months, and it's administered through bilateral agreements between Canada and Mexico and several Caribbean countries. This, of course, is also a point of contention. Some people say, well, if I just give an example, the Mexican state is as guilty as the Canadian state and employers in how the program is administered. This is, on the other hand, right, although it's part of sort of this conventional rhetoric, to say this, I also believe that we cannot really let the program only to be, how can I say, to be interpreted, analyzed, and administered through a Canadian-centered perspective, right? So we're in a context where labor actually gets bought and sold between nation state. We also need the migrants nation state to also be at the table, because the state is going to protect its citizens much better than any sort of Canadian actor will do that, specifically within this context in which we have, I think, as people know, there's a radical leftist party in the government of Mexico, and this program is actually a top priority in their sort of national social policy framework. Anyway, so to go to the next stage, so the issue in Nova Scotia is, okay, most people are coming to this program. We can move to the next slide. So most people are coming in through this program, which is a little bit more regulated than the low wage stream of the program. However, there are still issues with the program. So the main problem in Nova Scotia being, although the swap is more regulated and the rules are there, they tend to not be implemented. So housing again tends to be overcrowded and inadequate, sort of a lot of wear and tears. Although, the federal guidelines say that employers must provide the seasonal agricultural migrant workers with suitable and affordable housing, that doesn't necessarily happen. If you go to the next slide, we also have, issues with sort of the occupancy rules. So what we have found in Nova Scotia that, again, although the federal government requires employers to abide by the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation occupancy guidelines, which state that, okay, no more than 2 people per room, 2/3 of our participants still lived in overcrowded accommodation. And the issue here is also with the inspections. And I think part of it I mean, it seems that the state is much more proactive in PI and at least much more open to a conversation in New Brunswick, but in Nova Scotia, there's like a complete indifference to the topic, I would say that. So for instance, we contacted the Nova Scotia Department of Labor on housing inspection, and they told us, well, we don't do the housing inspection, you should contact Service Nova Scotia. But then when we contact Service Nova Scotia, they say, well, you have to go to the Department of Labor. We have sent the report to the government offices, but no one, usually, you know, the federal government reaches out once we publish some of these reports, or the provincial bodies, but this didn't necessarily happen in Nova Scotia. So I think there's also a lot of confusion, which, you know, who should inspect this housing. So for instance, again,
Raluca?
Yeah.
Hi, Raluca. 1 more minute.
Okay, so for instance, the federal government says, well, the appropriate provincial, territorial, or municipal authority should inspect housing. But again, no one knows which are those sort of like appropriate authorities. And another issue, and then I'll just sort of wrap it up with that, which I think is, again, very important here for Nova Scotia, and it's on the next slide, is what we basically term legalized wage theft. So workers are coming here, they think they're going to get paid by hour, and they end up getting paid by, let's say, a box of strawberries, and so on and so forth. So why we say we term this legalized wage theft, because employers are not necessarily doing anything illegal, but federal regulations stipulate that they have to be paid the prevailing wage of the region. But the Nova Scotia Labor Codes basically says, well, it doesn't matter if you're on the farm, you can be paid by wage. So that's, again, you have an issue of the provincial regulation contravening the federal regulation. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raluca. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next speaker, which is Tracy Glynn. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, please share them in the chat and we'll collect them. We're going to do a set of questions after the first 3 speakers. So Tracy is an assistant professor at St. Thomas University and a board member of the Madhu Verma Migrant Justice Center in Fredericton. Her activism is focused on supporting communities affected by resource extraction, migration, and border policies and inadequate healthcare services or healthcare access. And Tracy is also a member of the migrant workers in the Canadian Maritimes research team. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Raisa. I hope that you can hear me better now. Thanks. Thanks to Raisa for organizing this event. So I'm going to focus on housing conditions of migrant workers in New Brunswick. Next slide. So just some quick words about the Madhu Verma Migrant Justice Center. We were founded a couple of years ago. We support migrant workers and those with precarious immigration status in New Brunswick on the unceded territories of the Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, and the Mi'kmaq. And we run a migrant worker legal clinic, and we coordinate projects such as the Sanctuary Network that aims to rapidly connect migrants with services. And we also advocate for reforms to further migrant rights and also for systemic changes. So today, I want to talk about the housing situation of migrant workers in New Brunswick and offer some recommendations that we have for changes. And our recommendations are based on the premise that everyone should be guaranteed the right to safe, affordable, and dignified housing. Migrants are often excluded from public conversations about the housing crisis, and when they are included, they are blamed for a crisis that they did not create, and we're seeing this more and more. So while immigrants are the convenient scapegoat for the housing crisis, housing unaffordability, of course, can be traced to the financialization of housing, to real estate investment trusts and corporate landlords that are taking advantage of this moment. So as noted in the TFW Maritimes report, research led by my colleague here, Raluca Bejan, and also Christine Lane and Paula Soto Flores, and also part of this project is Ryan McRae and others. So in our New Brunswick report, we noted that workers in New Brunswick seafood processing plants reported living in overcrowded, unsafe conditions. And during the onset of COVID, when their housing should have really been more of a concern. So these findings are also bolstered by the cases we see at the Madu Center. Next slide. In April of this year, we released the report Ensuring Housing Rights for Migrants in New Brunswick by Amy Floyd, Aditya Rao, and myself. So in brief, our report found that migrant housing in New Brunswick is inadequate, unsafe, unaffordable. Last year, the Madu Center conducted the Housing Justice's Migrant Justice Report project, with funds from the Catherine Donnelly Foundation. And in this report, we contextualized the housing situation facing different migrant groups in New Brunswick and looked at how we can improve housing for migrants and all people in the province. Next slide. I was hoping to screen a clip of this, but I don't think I have time, but I really do encourage all of you to check out the film we made. There's the going back to the QR code. This film is now available in French and Spanish with French and Spanish subtitles, and includes the voices of migrant workers talking about their housing conditions. So just for some further contextualization, temporary foreign workers under the SWAP program live in employer-provided housing. Many other temporary foreign workers are tenants, and many of them pay rent to a landlord who is also, in many cases, their employer, or to a landlord who is connected to their employer. That's what we're seeing in these rural communities in New Brunswick. There's also the workforce housing program that big employers in New Brunswick like JD Irving use to house their migrant workforce. So migrant workers on closed work permits are fearful that they may not be invited back to work in Canada the following season. So such fears have stopped them from speaking out against landlords and employers who violate their rights. Next slide. So with the assistance of Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, our partner here in New Brunswick, they have two staff people, Niger Saravia and Sonia Villas and Miramichi. We were present at the Senate Committee's meeting, the Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology that was 2 Septembers ago, where we drew attention to workers there. As you see in this photo, workers displayed photos of their moldy and damaged living quarters. Next slide. We also were we able to facilitate the presence of migrant workers at the UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery when he was in Moncton in September 2023. Next slide. So section 31 of his report focuses on housing. It notes that overcrowding with situations of 20 to 30 people sharing a single washroom, mixed gender housing that raised protection concerns for women who had not consented to such arrangements, and a lack of adequate climate control, laundry facilities, food preparation, storage areas as problems. So as stated by the migrant workers in the film Chaos and Control, and in numerous reports by the Migrant Rights Network, researchers, migrant workers are living in overcrowded conditions. They continue to do this. They live in unsafe conditions with rodents and mold. They are experiencing energy poverty, the inability to control the temperature in their homes. Their housing lacks, they're also living in isolated rural locations. They spend a lot of time waiting. That's what we often hear, waiting to use the toilet, waiting to use the shower, waiting to cook a meal in the kitchen, and they lack privacy. So yeah, we're often told to report abuses to the government tip line. However, and we've shared this with our friends at ESDC. In one case, of workers that were living in several housing units connected to one employer. When these workers reported it to the tip line, the employer was advised ahead of time of the upcoming inspection. The employer asked the workers to help clean up and repair the housing, and also threatened them with being with not being uninvited, or sorry, with being disinvited from returning to work the following season. So those workers that did cooperate were, who did not cooperate, were not invited back the following year. So months later, the outcome of that inspection too has not been made known to the workers, and it's expected that the inspection did not result in any penalties for housing violations. So what would solve this? So deplorable housing conditions of migrant workers could be prevented through enforcement of the national housing guidelines and a more robust housing inspection system. We know that to receive a LMIA that's needed to hire foreign workers, employers providing housing must have that housing inspected no more than 8 months prior to the worker's arrival. Advocates say that such a inspection system fails to catch and prevent housing violations. I'm just going to go on a little bit more on my notes, maybe next slide. So while housing is a challenge for many people in New Brunswick in need of immediate attention, certain groups of newcomers, like temporary foreign workers in the province, face unique challenges, housing challenges. And so this was the focus of our report. Our report calls on all levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, to fund and build affordable housing. That's one thing. So including housing that accommodates larger families. Housing was once treated as a social good in Canada, but in the last 40 years, housing has been left to the market. All levels of governments have failed to fund, build, and acquire adequate numbers of affordable rental units. Governments have consistently weakened tenant protections, allowing landlords to profit handsomely from limited or no caps on rent increases. Next slide. So we're asking also the federal government to strengthen and enforce the national housing standards to better protect temporary foreign workers by enforcing the national occupancy standards and employer provided housing. This would put an end to room sharing and bunk bed use, which is still a common practice. The federal government must also make inspections of employer-provided migrant worker housing unannounced and regular to prevent violations of housing standards. Violations should come with stiff penalties and disqualification from accessing migrant worker programs.
Tracy,
yeah.
1 minute, one more minute.
Thanks. So next slide. So we recommend to the province of New Brunswick, we want reforms to the residential tenancy legislation to, to protect all tenants. We want the province to also regularly and spontaneously inspect the housing of employer provided migrant worker housing. We want to provide, also in-home and living caregivers protections as well. And we want also to extend the rent bank to all people, including the undocumented. So maybe next slide. We're also concerned, it's not just maybe the obvious legislation around housing, but there's other kinds of legislation that harms migrant workers. There's the Safer Communities and Neighborhoods Act, SCAN, that really targets racialized folks in our communities. That's been in place in New Brunswick for a while now. So SCAN fast tracks evictions on the basis of complaints regarding suspicions of criminal activity to a tip line, and based on evidence brought forward by the government department in charge of the tip line, not the police, a judge can order an eviction. So this is something that we're concerned about. I moderate a tenant Facebook group chat, and I'm sad to say that, that some tenants complain about their neighbors in racist terms. And next slide. If you're interested,
Tracy, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you very much. And now we will move on to our third speaker. And just a reminder to everyone, please put your questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A period after Ryan speaks. So our next speaker is Ryan McRae. So Ryan has a master's in global affairs and has worked for various NGOs in Canada and the Dominican Republic. Ryan works as a program coordinator for the Migrant Worker Program at Cooper Institute in Charlottetown. And Ryan is also a member of the migrant workers in the Canadian Maritime's research team. So over to you, Ryan.
Lovely. Thank you so much. You can hear me all right?
Yeah.
Good, good. A whole bunch of us from the research team here. Lovely. Hi, folks. I'm Ryan. I'm with the Cooper Institute and the PEI Action Team for Migrant Worker Rights. I was asked to come here today to present some research that I recently co-authored with a colleague of mine, Eliza McLaughlin. It's this report here, temporary or permanent jobs, temporary people. There's a lot of support and input from both Tracy and Raluca. Thanks for that. The report kind of looks at the journey that a lot of workers try to go from kind of a temporary foreign worker to a permanent resident in PEI. And rather than kind of focusing on that, I kind of want to pull specific aspects of, and findings from the report that kind of intertwine with some of the work and my experiences working under the Migrant Worker Support Project here with the RACA. So yeah. Right here, I just wanted to talk at the start. So one of the first things we found in doing interviews for this, we talked with migrant workers, with service providers, with government, and with employers. And one of the things we were hearing from service providers who were getting funded by IRCC is that it's not necessarily the permanent residents that need the most support. It's actually the temporary residents. It's temporary foreign workers who are the ones with the most need. And whenever you get funded through IRCC for settlement services, you're really only funded to work with permanent residents, refugees, AIP applicants, and Q8 recipients, which is the Ukrainians who are fleeing the war in Ukraine. Notably, not temporary foreign workers or any other temporary residents. Now, in PEI, that is a little different. The provincial government does step in to give some funding to those groups so they can work with anybody, but that's only a meager amount of funding and not true for the rest of Canada. What we also heard from one of the government representatives is, the fact that now we're seeing about 90% of the people coming to the island are temporary residents. So the two takeaways here are that, the bulk of people coming to PEI are temporary residents, and they're the ones with the most need. Which is interesting. I mean, just to look at the federal level here, this title is not super accurate, unfortunately. That blue line actually represents temporary foreign workers entering the country over that time span there on the bottom, both temporary foreign workers and international mobility program participants. Those are the people that are funded to get support through the Migrant Worker Support Project. And the red line there in the bottom would be permanent residents, people obtaining their permanent residency in Canada, and Q8 recipients. Not included there in the PR numbers would be refugees, but not included there is AIP applicants, just because I couldn't find accurate data on it. So you can see that there's an increase in temporary residents, and again, this doesn't include like international students and refugee claimants and whatnot, but it's a rough idea just to show you that there's an increasing number and there's kind of a widening gap happening. Yet, whenever we look at funding for these types of things, this is all from budget 2021. It's a little bit different. So ESTC's Migrant Worker Support Program gets $49.5 million over 3 years. That works out to be $16.5 million each year. IRCC Settlement Services, just for the 2021-2022 fiscal year for 1 year, including the money that Quebec gets, which is separate, we're looking at about $1.4 billion. I think last fiscal year from 23 to 24, it was 1.8 billion in total. So you're looking at programs that the settlement services are getting funded for over 100 times the amount that this Migrant Worker Support Project is getting funded for. Yet what we're seeing is that it's temporary residents, it's temporary foreign workers that need the most support, and they're also the ones that are making up the most numbers, right? That are coming into the country, and that has real consequences. I'll just say, and we can talk more about that later. But just even what we're seeing here on PEI and the capacity we have to give support, it's just not there. This is a really interesting table. I would love to talk more about it. I just don't think I'm going to have time to, so we'll skip that. If there's questions later, maybe we can pop back to it. I want to talk a little bit now, going from funding, and I want to talk more about kind of protective policies that I guess exist. And Tracy actually did a really good job kind of speaking about a lot of these things, so I'm going to touch on some of them again. But one of the things that we saw from our research is, this is a quote from a participant that took part in the research, a migrant worker who said that, they had called ESTC, used the tip lines various times, them and their coworkers, whenever they were experiencing abuse, and nothing happened. And they said, if I did the only thing that I knew I could do, and if nothing happens, what else, right? What do I do? And this is interesting because, as Tracy mentioned, about a month before we put that research out, the Senate Standing Committee on Social Affairs, Science, and Technology put out their publication called Act Now. And in that, there's a really interesting kind of thing that I saw where the Deputy Minister of IRCC said that this TIPS line that ESTC has, they kind of celebrated. They said, you know, we've done 570 inspections that were carried out by virtue of using the TIPS line from people that have used the TIPS line. From what I could see online, I think the TIPS line was kind of revamped in March of 2021. I believe it existed well before that, but I think it was revamped in 2021. A lot of the interviews for this research, like Tracy mentioned, were happening late 2023. So let's just assume that from the period 2021, 2022, and 2023, for those 3 years, if they're receiving, as you can see in this quote, 5,000 calls annually, that means we're looking at about 15,000 calls taking place. If there's 570 inspections happening, that means about 3.8% of calls actually yield an inspection. And I want you to take a moment and I want you to think, would it be acceptable if ambulances, police officers, and firefighters showed up to 3.8% of their calls? Of course it wouldn't be, right? Like this is an emergency service and we need to treat it as such. I want to talk a little bit about this. My colleagues are probably sick of hearing me talk about this, but it's a really good example of kind of the lack of oversight of this program, really. There's an apple farm in PEI where basically there's an immigration fraud scheme taking place. We worked extensively with a number of people coming through here. But what I want to say is over a 3-year period, we supported 3 separate groups of workers to leave this place, this abusive situation. There was even a group of workers that left prior to us engaging in this that we became aware of after. So there's 4 different groups of workers that are leaving. During this time, IRCC is receiving tons of other groups of workers submitting open work permit applications for vulnerable workers. At the same time, ESTC is issuing LMIAs for the same employer, right? There is no communication between these 2 lines, between IRCC and ESTC. And this is true for other things, right? Like I know, like I've worked during this project. I've submitted open work permit applications for people who've experienced sexual abuse, for employers who are not following through with their commitments under their work contracts. And yet, even though IRCC approves these open work permits, ESTC continues to issue LMIAs for these employers. And I've heard government tell me, I've heard people say, well, you need to do 2. You need to do both. You need to file the open work permit application with IRCC, and then you also need to use the TIPS line to let ESTC know about these things. And I'll say, we've done that. We've done that. And what happens is there's a situation where the open work permit got denied, but the TIPS line yielded an inspection, took place, and because the workplace only had 3 or 4 workers, it was easy for the employer to know who carried out the inspect, who kind of complained about this, and it resulted in us having to leave midway through the night to evacuate a worker that was scared for their security. So it's difficult, and I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of the work that we do with the Migrant Worker Support Project, we lean on these things like the ESTC TIPS line, maybe provincial employment standards legislation, so filing complaints through there. But the problem is that both of these things don't change the conditions on someone's work permit. And that's the crux of it, right? If you can't do that, like these things become useless. And I think we need to see more engagement and kind of bilateral information sharing between IRCC and ESTC, and hopefully also at the provincial level too, because it's frustrating. These are things, I don't know if I'm going to have time to, but I can try to go through some of them a little bit. This is just data that I looked at. I will say, actually, if I go back, this employer still to this day, even though like they fled PEI, but it's because there's been provincial and national coverage on this issue, and they've got scared and they left. ESTC to date has still not listed this employer on the list of employers non-compliant of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. And when we look at data from that, this is all public, and I've kind of taken some of it and compiled it into different kind of ways to see it. And I'll skip this one just for the sake of time. But if you look at just what has happened here, 12% of employers that are found non-compliant get a ban from using the program, only 12%. And of that 12%, if you look at the bottom right there, 75% of those bans are just for 1 or 2 years. I've heard Mark Miller talk to a committee before saying, we've banned people from using the program for life. That's happened once in the history of the program since they started doing this in 2016. That's happened one time. And if we look over here on the left for the financial programs that happen, or financial penalties, I guess, that are issued. We got 1 minute, Raisa?
1 minute, Ryan.
Got you. We'll wrap up. If we look at the financial penalties here on the left side, you know, about a third of those financial penalties are the same price, that basically they cost as much as an LMIA does, right? One LMIA. So I think that ESTC doesn't have the capacity to monitor this program, and even whenever people are found non-compliant, the penalties aren't high enough to deter bad actors, quite simply. And the final thing I'll kind of say to wrap up really quickly is just that, like, we need to find also ways that whenever investigations are happening, that workers are protected. And this is something that we found in the report. Someone said there's a situation where the employer was getting investigated. There's an inspection going on. And because of that, the employer was not able to receive LMIAs. Well, who pays the price when an LMIA isn't issued? It's the workers. And a bunch of workers fell out of status. It puts them at a lot of risk, right? And I think that whenever an employer is being inspected, or whenever an open work permit gets issued for one individual at one workplace, every worker there should get permanent residency. But at a minimum, they need to get open work permits as well. At a minimum, right? We need to protect people, because otherwise, like, workers will pay the price for this. And finally, I guess I'll wrap up and just say, like, this work's important. We're able to do a lot of these meetings with workers outside of the realm of their employer, and that's how we get the information, and they can talk to us honestly. So, you know, we need these programs to keep going. It's vital work, and here's some lovely faces that I've got to share some time with. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan. Great. Okay, so we are now in a period of Q&A. So if you have questions, once again, a reminder to put them in the chat. I'm just going to start off with a first question for Raluca. And maybe if we could, Ryan, if you can stop sharing your slides. And then if Tracy, Raluca, and Ryan can put your, yeah, okay, great. You all have your videos on. That's excellent. So first question for Raluca, which I think maybe you weren't able to get to in your presentations, but what are your recommendations for enhancing the protection and working conditions of migrant workers? Oh, and you're on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. So very similar to what Ryan has also have stated, right? So in all our reports, the first recommendation is to sort of grant PR on arrival. Because that's going to subsequently get rid of a lot of other problems, right? So as I said, if you are philosophically speaking, right, like you start from this premise of who has the right to have rights, and then those who have the right to have rights are Canadians and permanent residents. What you want to do is also bring the people with less rights at the same sort of, you know, starting point, more or less. So granting PR on arrival will get rid of a lot of problems. Of course, not everyone wants to stay in Canada, and it would be very arrogant to assume so, but it wouldn't matter, because people who don't want to stay, they will simply not stay, right? And people who want to stay, they could stay. And I think the second one, and Ryan also mentioned this, is to grant at the minimum, right, open working permits. At least, you know, if I don't like my job here, I can look for another job, right? And then at least I have that option, but the workers do not have that option. So oftentimes they end up staying in these conditions, and the relation between the employer and the workers, because it's just not one of sort of free choice, is by design very abusive. So and then we have several recommendations for the provincial government as well, but particularly this stuff with the inspection, right? So the provincial governmental bodies to sort of inspect the employer provided residencies for the seasonal agricultural worker. And it's hard because no one even knows who should inspect those, right? So as I said, that the provincial bodies tend to be sort of confused. And then in Nova Scotia is this problem with the Nova Scotia Labor Act, and I think this also needs to be sort of revamped, right? It's not 19th century anymore. So, and the farms are not these sort of small farms in which, you know, I have one and I work there with my cousins and my parents and so on. They're like really industrial enterprises, right? Like people make a lot of money. And the issue is also that you know, they are actually subsidized by the state, because if they didn't have to provide if they, the only reason these companies function and they're profitable is because they're allowed to pay cheap wages. Because if they were having to pay, wages for a par with the Canadian workers, they just probably a lot of them will not survive. So anyway, so another recommendations that I want to emphasize is to undertake a comprehensive review of the Nova Scotia Labor Standards Code to grant all farm workers access to overtime rate, minimum wage, holiday pay, days off, right paid sick days, and so on and so forth. And I'll just stop here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So then over to you, Tracy. You had already talked a bit about some recommendations for housing conditions. Do you have any other recommendations that you wanted to share to ensure better housing conditions for migrant workers in New Brunswick?
Yeah, I guess what I didn't get to was just what you just heard from Raluca and Ryan, that giving people permanent residency, more direct pathways to permanent residency status if they want it, as well as ending the closed work permit system. I feel like it's a broken record, like we sound like a broken record, but our government has not heard us. And those are I think, the two things that trap workers in abusive working conditions, makes them further in situations of precarity. And so really those two things. We didn't get talking much about healthcare, and I think that's an important issue. We're supporting a number of workers who don't have access to healthcare. And we feel that like Medicare on arrival for temporary foreign workers is important. We do this for other groups of people that come to Canada. But we're treating temporary foreign workers like they're tourists, and they're not. They are provided with private health insurance while they're here, but we know that doesn't cover the existing conditions. It doesn't cover many things that they need. So I would just like to stress that again, is that like Medicare on arrival for temporary foreign workers is really important.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And just one more question here for Raluca, and then I think we'll go on to the next speakers. But so this is from the chat. Can you expand more on the fact that the Mexican government is currently monitoring the TFW program and what that review might yield in terms of enhancing the protection of Mexican nationals?
Yeah, I mean, I cannot most likely give more details than this. It's just that the program is part of it was part of also of the electoral platform of the new president, right? So Mexico has Morena. It's a sort of radical leftist party. The president right now, it's a woman, right? She has a PhD in climate change. So it's like, and she has quite a progressive agenda. And this program was part of of her electoral campaign too. So I think definitely in terms of increasing workers' rights. I mean, the story is complicated because a lot of the workers are like engaging in what, Mexico will call circular migration, right? So they come here, work, and there's also a lot of people are also able to capitalize on the fact that, the Canadian dollar is valued higher, and then they can go to their countries and like do something else. So anyway, it's a complicated issue, and I'm just looking now at the chat. So in terms of monitoring per se, I don't know exactly what steps Mexico is going to take. I know they just had the consultation with the federal government probably a month ago, and they do those every year. The consulate comes here in Nova Scotia at least once a year, and they inspect some of the workers' housing. I know that they have some sort of lists, and they have around 4 or 5 staff which are regularly in contact with some of the workers. But in terms of their proactive steps and what's going to happen next, I'm not able to comment. I just don't really know their specific approach.
Okay. Okay, great. So I see there's another question in the chat. We're going to hold that one until our next Q&A period, and we're going to go on to our next speaker. So Simone Kendall is our next speaker, And Simone is manager of the Worker Protection Policy and Partnership Team at the TFW, Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and responsible for the Migrant Worker Support Program. Simone was born and raised in Newfoundland and Labrador, where she obtained a master's degree in social and economic development or sociology at Memorial University. And over the past 17 years, she's been a dedicated federal public servant, occupying both policy and strategic roles, including occupational health and safety policy for the labor program, legislative and regulatory development for the Canada Student Financial Assistance Program, as well as advisor in Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security Operations. So I see your slides are up there, Simone, so over to you.
Thanks so much, Risa. Let me just start to say thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure to certainly hear the presentations thus far, and I'm certainly taking lots of notes in terms of bringing back the valuable information that you've shared to my colleagues. And as Risa just said, I'm a manager in sort of policy, worker protection policy and partnerships. And my team is responsible for the Migrant Worker Support Program and to ensure that it continues. So just to give you some context, just maybe the next slide, please. So most of you may already know this. Part of the Government of Canada's broader commitment to protecting foreign workers from mistreatment and abuse. The program was launched in 2022. And thankfully, Budget 2024 announced the continuation of this program for another 2 years, that of which Étoile just informed you as well. So the program's objective is to provide support to temporary foreign workers to learn about their rights and exercise them. And it achieves this goal by providing funding to community-based organizations across Canada to provide migrant worker-centric programs and services, including on-arrival and community-based services. The program currently funds 10 recipients across the country who in turn have over 100 sub-recipient holders. During the period of from January 2023 to March, all these organizations have had over 387,500 service interactions, and Aracia has almost 25,000 service interactions. And I just want to highlight the slight nuance that Étoile certainly gave you in terms of the number of migrant workers reached in her slides. So she actually articulated the number of migrant workers that have been reached by Aracia and subrecipients. My number reflects the number of service interactions. So any interaction, whether it's providing information, or if there's a community event, or it's providing one-on-one support for someone's applying for an open work permit for vulnerable workers. This is captured as a service interaction, each and every one. So it's not only important in terms of the number of migrant workers, but how you guys are helping migrant workers on the ground is what we try to capture in our reporting. Next slide, please. Given that it has been a few years since this program has been in existence, the team and I, over the summer, reached out to the 10 recipients to hear from them in terms of what works, what doesn't work, what are the current and emerging migrant workers' needs, and how can the program better address those issues. So for my presentation today, I'm reflecting those comments and feedback received from all 10 recipients. Of course, I'm not presenting the federal government's opinion or analysis or next steps on this, but certainly want to give the participants here today an understanding of what all organizations are saying across Canada in terms of where to go and what the recommendations are with regards to this Migrant Worker Support Program. Next slide, please. So what works? Overall, we heard that in terms of the two main objectives of the program, there were no recommendations that said we should focus in other areas. It was felt that in the general sense, helping migrant workers learn about and exercise their rights kind of still reflect the needs of migrant workers. So that was good news in our books in terms of us hitting the mark in terms of where where the activities and funding should be provided. Another of course, benefit to the program itself is the redistribution of funds. So it was built into our terms and conditions that there was a flexibility for contribution recipients, so the main 10 recipients, to work with sub-recipients. So of course, this allows for grassroots organizations to be present and respond to migrant workers, and certainly to be cognizant of the workers and their needs on the ground, no matter what region they're in or jurisdiction they're in. Partnerships, of course, is super key in terms of the networking capacity of the Migrant Worker Support Program. Of course, better together. I love the fact that Risa did kind of frame the funding that they've received from Migrant Worker Support Program, because that's exactly it. Is better together. Synergies between organizations help to effectively support migrant workers on the ground, providing more efficient community services, particularly pooling resources in times of emergencies. So therein, partnerships is certainly one of the vital keys of this program. Not present currently in the Atlantic region, but we do have organizations present at 3 airports in the country, so Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary. And excuse me. And so those that have participated, who are recipients in to provide those services to migrant workers, have spoke about the benefits relating to having migrant worker organizations on the ground, and in some cases, even within security. So for example, our organization in BC does have access to migrant workers as soon as they arrive. So they provide them information, they provide them snacks, they provide them information in terms of who on the ground can support them if they have questions. So it's been noted that these organizations that are present in the airports is essential in terms of helping migrant workers connect with the community organizations on the ground and the services available to them. Next slide, please. So what works continues. So community-based outreach, and I like the when we met with the organizations, TNO, the neighborhood organization, is an organization in Ontario, and they certainly said it nicely in terms of how important the community-based outreach is. They are the lifeline that allows organizations to put in place all the other services. So in terms of how do we itemize that, or how do we list all those other services available, the outreach activities certainly allow organizations to ultimately build trust. So if you think about, it's a nice friendly face, there's someone there that can speak their language, and they can resort to in terms of, I have someone here who understands my needs, and certainly the sort of jurisdictional space in which I work in. So it's someone that they see that they can rely on. Through the transfer of information, for example, that organizations provide, they're able to establish the relationship with the migrant workers and build that trust that established the lifeline. So you build a relation through the information in which you provide. In terms of the third, provide information in practical terms about their rights. One thing that we certainly heard in terms of in the ensuring that migrant workers knew about their rights and what that meant is, while, for example, the Temporary Foreign Worker Program does have, the guide that your rights are protected. The organizations certainly were vital in terms of what, helping migrant workers to really understand what that means in practical terms. Migrant workers come from different nationalities, backgrounds, education level, culture, and so providing that additional support to workers in terms of understanding what that means for them in this job, in this province, was certainly vital. So not only like providing them information, but making it make sense to them in terms of their understanding and their in terms of their background. The last item I have there is in terms of what works about the Migrant Worker Support Program is services and support for migrant workers to exercise their rights. So where there is abuse or mistreatment, organizations provide a range of support, including supporting workers to apply for the open work permit for vulnerable workers. And just to pause there, ERASA, as well as our other 9 recipient organizations, had over the fall two sort of engagements with IRCC in terms of helping IRCC to understand the realities of workers applying to those open work permits for vulnerable workers. So the organizations on the ground are very vital in terms of helping migrant workers apply for those open work permits.
Simone?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, 1 more minute.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So how about I skip along? You probably already know very well in terms of what does work. So next on to the challenges. Some of these won't be a surprise, but I'm sure that my presentation will be provided to you all, and I certainly would welcome any questions thereafter. But of course, there's some of the challenges related to the program is that it's short-term funding. The need for stable and long-term funding as a cornerstone to effective service delivery. And what was emphasized is that having short-term or project-based funding compromises the retention of skilled employees, disrupts the development of strong networks, and erodes the trust and relationships that have been built with migrant workers. And even in some cases with employers, because we know that with time, this migrant worker support program has been gaining certainly ground in terms of building very established congenial relationships with employers who do want to help the migrant workers. So, but not having long-term funding doesn't help in terms of keeping those lasting relationships. Emergency funding was another thing. Hitwal and I and Simone sort of spoke about that there's a need for flexible, timely approvals. If it's an emergency, you need approvals now. And so there was great discussion around how we can better improve that responsiveness in terms of providing funds directly to migrant workers. Limited funding. When the program started, Rick Luca certainly noted that, in the last number of years, the number of migrant workers have exploded. And thus, it's hard for migrant worker organizations on the ground, not only to keep up with the demand of the volume of workers, but also as you guys are more established, it seems there's more momentum in terms of the awareness of migrant worker support organizations out there. So not so much related to ERASA or the Atlantic region, but in terms of, and maybe it is, certainly I'm open to hearing, it's just there was an express need for more information from the consulates in terms of, and potentially from the federal government if possible, like when the workers are arriving, where are they arriving, what employment are they going to, and so on and so forth. So sort of like this sort of seamless understanding so that organizations can be on the ground to support knowing when and where the migrant workers will be present in their roles. Just one more thing, I think we can skip to the last number 8. How can the Migrant Worker Support Program be improved? Obviously, long-term funding, increase the amount of funding so organizations can meet the demand for services, provide organizations with more flexibility to make emergency funding decisions to ensure timely intervention, provide migrant worker organizations with training opportunities, given, they support workers who work in a very multi-jurisdictional space, and the inclusion of pre-arrival services, so more information in terms of helping organizations to be ready to meet the demands of migrant workers when they arrive. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Great. So we will move on now to our last speaker of the day, which is Santiago Escobar, who is the national representative with United Food and Commercial Workers Union in Canada. And that's one of Canada's most diverse unions and represents and helps organize workers in the food processing sector, as well as healthcare, security, non-food manufacturing, and other key sectors of the economy. So over to you, Santiago. I see your video's on, and I'm seeing your slides. So go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Hello, hello.
Yes, yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
we hear you.
Okay, amazing. Give me 1 second. Please. Give me 1 second. My presentation.
Santiago, are you having problem for projecting the PowerPoint?
Yes, I'm trying to. Okay, so now the first page, right? So you see the first.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
It should be. Okay, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Santiago Escobar. I'm a national representative with the union UFCW. We represent over 250,000 workers across Canada in the food processing, retail, cannabis, healthcare, and many other sectors of the economy. Our membership includes about 9,000 temporary foreign workers with closed work permits. We have members in the Maritimes. We represent temporary foreign workers working at seafood and food processing working plants in the Maritimes. I'm also coordinating the Migrant Member Support Program. So this program aims to support our migrant members. We offer, and also non-migrant members, we offer ESL classes to help migrant workers to overcome language barriers and qualify for the Agri-Food Pilot Program, which is a program we strongly lobby the federal government to create it. So we assist our members to obtain PR through the Agri-Food Pilot Program and also through provincial nominee programs. We also provide ESL classes. We file their permanent residency applications, saving thousands of dollars in legal fees. And we also lobby the federal government to implement open work permits and more paths to PR. And lately we are lobbying provincial governments to implement sectorial bargaining rights for those in agriculture as a mean of protect their right. Having said that, we also would like to share the language we are implementing in our collective agreements to support our migrant members. In this way, these workers, they can exercise their labor rights, their human rights. So among the clauses that we are implementing in our collective agreements, the most important one is called recall rights. Recall rights means that workers who have passed, temporary foreign workers who have passed the probation time, they would qualify to have recall rights, meaning that the position belongs to the worker and they have the first option to be recalled. This is huge because workers are, they don't have security and they're in a very precarious situation. They don't have labor mobility, so this is is helping out tremendously. We also are implementing in our collective agreements language that is aiming to support temporary foreign workers with $2,000 to pay their fees, English test or French test. On top of that, we're assisting our members filing their peer applications at no cost. We also are implementing housing inspections in our collective agreements, meaning that a union representative is coordinating with the employer to visit, to do the housing inspections and make sure that the workers are treated with dignity and respect and have all the appliances they deserve. Also, we do have access to the workplace, so we have regular visits to make sure that the collective agreement is respected and observe working conditions. We also provide assistance with healthcare with migrant workers. With a migrant worker gets injured at work and they need to see a doctor, we provide transportation and translation. This is something that is standardized across our units across Canada. We also have obtained more vacation time. Every 5 years of employment, temporary foreign workers are entitled to additional week of vacation. So on average, they will have 4 weeks paid by the employer, which is huge. And also, we have been able to negotiate that the employer will provide $150 to cover part of the airfare. They go vacation. We have also, this is very important, leave of absence. So we have this regard. I have some notes here. So when it comes to, we have sick leave, 5 basic days for those in agriculture, and the agri-food sector is probably up to 12. Bereavement leave, average a week paid by the employer. And when the workers need to return to their countries because they have a family that is sick or they need to spend more time back home, so they can be there up to 12 months without pay, which is huge because the job is protected. When they have been able to, to sort it out, they'll be able to return to their workplace. They won't be terminated. We have been able also to negotiate a minimum work week. This have been is a huge gain because now workers, temporary foreign workers, are entitled to receive at least 30 hours, even if the employer doesn't provide or doesn't have the work, it's not operating, they must comply and they have to pay at least 30 hours to temporary foreign workers. In agriculture is very important to mention that because usually employers don't respect their agreement. So this is a very important one. We also created an inspection committee, which is in charge of inspecting the housing conditions and also the health and safety conditions. So the employer, the union, and the workers are working together to make sure that housing conditions and working conditions are respected. The workplace is free of hazards, and workers are trained also to be able to attend and support if workers get injured at work. This is more or less what we have achieved. And also it's important to mention that we just obtained the first collective agreement in British Columbia. I'm talking about highland mushroom workers, over close to 500 mushroom workers, the majority from Mexico, Guatemala. These workers joined our union about 4 months ago, and we are in the process of ratifying the collective agreement. The workers will have to vote and ratify if they agree with the collective agreements. We obtain 5% wage increase. We get premium pay for those who are cutting the mushroom. The ones immediately after signing the collective agreement, they will have a $500 bonus, plus all the clauses that I already shared. So this is very important to show that the union, through a collective agreement, by empowering workers, working conditions can improve and we want to set a precedent. So hopefully the goal is that the agricultural industry will improve because the low labor standards, wages, is because the lack of union density. So we claim that by including and bringing more workers, the union, so these workers will be able to exercise their rights, human rights, collective labor rights, and they will have a mechanism they have a grievance procedure if something, if they have a complaint, if the collective agreement is not respected. It's very important that
Santiago, 1 more minute, please.
Thank you. To mention that the collective agreement is a binding document, so it becomes a law that must be respected by the employer. So when the employer doesn't respect the collective agreement, we have the grievance procedures. So workers have a right to complain. They also have a right to refuse unsafe work. So all of these protections are implemented in the collective agreement, and we hope that this will attract more temporary foreign workers to join our union. And thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, we are in a period of questions now. And there have been a few questions in the chat. So Santiago, if you could stop sharing your screen, and if we could have the speakers all turn on their cameras. The first question is for Ryan. So Ryan, what are your recommendations with regards to strengthening the inspection regime? ESTC justified the non-systematic trigger of an inspection after a complaint, specifically not to make it obvious who complained. How can this issue be mitigated practically? And related to this, what is the staffing and funding situation of the inspection departments?
Yeah, the second part of that question, great question. I would love to also know. The first part, I think, I think it was either Tracy or Luca kind of said, we sound like a broken record, but you're going to hear it again. Give people permanent residency at a minimum, and the closed work permit regime. Give people the labor mobility to leave and flee an abusive situation. That's probably the easiest and best, most comprehensive thing you can do. I don't think the federal government is in a position to want to do that. But so I guess in lieu of that, at a minimum, I know ESTC. There's been situations where, in that situation I referenced, they like Tracy said, they informed the employer 2 days before showing up to do an inspection, and then they also told the employer that they're doing the inspection because they received a complaint. Don't do that. Simple as that. There's a workplace where there's 3 or 4 employees. The employer has a particular issue with one person. It's pretty evident, I spoke recently, I don't know with the ESTC, but even at the employment standards at the provincial level, people do inspections of fish plants every year, they told me. But when I asked about it, I said, how do you engage with workers? And they said, well, we don't. And it's like, how are you doing an inspection if you're not talking to workers? And when you are talking to workers, you need to, I've also heard times that there's other groups that have come through to do investigations, and internal investigations happen, and people will talk to groups of migrant workers together in unison. And it's like, that doesn't work either. People don't want to speak up against about things and be known as kind of the whistleblower, because it puts their status in the country and their job at risk, and like Tracy's highlighted, not just their job, but also where they're living, because oftentimes their landlord is also their employer. So I think, yeah, it's like a bit of a long-winded answer, but there's smaller things we can do. PR is kind of all roads lead there, PR upon arrival, but there's other smaller things we can do. And they need, I guess the last thing I will say, they need to be proactive inspections. And if you're relying on complaints-based inspections, it's not going to work, right? You need to constantly, because you need to be coming and doing inspections often enough that people aren't going to question if one happens, right? They're not going to think, oh, this was from a complaint, right?
Thanks, Ryan. I was muted there. Okay, next question is for Simone. What was the level of participation in the survey conducted in the summer of 2024 from organizations supporting migrant workers?
So I I think there was a survey that we sent out to migrant workers last fall. I believe that the person's referring to. So it was approximately 1,600 migrant workers responded. We used our migrant worker organizations as well as consulates and other stakeholders of the temporary foreign worker program. So in the end, we heard from approximately 1,600 temporary foreign workers that survey, and we would be happy to share it. We have provided the results to our migrant worker organizations directly, but if anyone does want to see certainly the results from that survey, we would certainly be happy to share it as well.
Great. And I'm going to keep you there for one more question, Simone. Has ESDC given consideration to moving beyond short-term funding to multi-year funding for community-based organizations providing essential supports to migrant workers?
We consider all avenues in terms of options when we're sort of advocating or putting proposals together to Finance Canada, of course. As per the results that we received from our summer engagements, noting the positives with regards to long-term funding, yes, we consider all angles, short-term versus long-term, various activities. We certainly do not leave any stone unturned as we are, in terms of the Migrant Worker Support Program and in our analysis. So yes, we consider all angles, every angle.
Thank you, Simone. Ryan, is that?
Can I just ask a question?
I've got another one on the.
Oh, sorry. I'll write it
docket.
out. I'll write it out. You're good.
Okay. Okay. So the next question is for Santiago. Can you? This person wants more detailed information on how union membership is provided to workers. Is it optional or mandatory? So anything you can share about that?
Yeah, of course. Freedom of association is a right in Canada. So the process is, if the workers want to bring a union, they can, collectively bargain. So the way it works is that usually they call to our union. So we meet with the workers, local workers or migrant workers. We explain the process. We empower workers. Basically, it's a know your rights about the Labor Relations Act. In the case of many provinces across Canada, is you need like majority, simple majority, in some cases 55%, which is the case in BC and Quebec, star check certification. So in some provinces, you have to ratify by voting. In Quebec and British Columbia, is just card check certification. If you have over 55% of support, you have the unit certification. And then the process is participatory. Workers are part of the bargaining committee. They meet with the employer several dates in order to that collective agreement is a long document, over 100 pages, that covers health and safety, transportation, wages, seniority, job protection, you name it. So the workers are part of the process. So basically the union, the workers are the union. So they're part of the union. It's a participatory process.
Okay, great. And so we are going to we've got one more time for one more question, and it's for you again, Santiago. So how many migrant workers are unionized as part of the UFCW, and in which provinces? And are there efforts being conducted by the union in the Atlantic provinces to unionize the migrant workers?
Yes. We do represent workers in the Atlantic, and we are updating our collective agreements, including more language that represents the needs, such as recall rights, which is probably the most important one. We represent across Canada probably over 9,000 temporary foreign workers working at meat plants, working at greenhouses, and the working conditions, the dignity and respect they have is the way to go. So we are showing that even though temporary foreign workers are in a very vulnerable situation, when they have a union, they have a voice, they have a mechanism to exercise their human and labor rights. And representation, I think, is very important, because workers who are represented by our union, they don't experience harassment, they don't experience racism, favoritism. So it's is a game changer.
Great. Thank you very much. So thank you to all of our speakers and to all those great questions. So we are going to be going into breakout rooms now so that everyone on the meeting can have some time to discuss and share some thoughts. So we're going to be sending you out into breakout rooms, and we do have a couple of questions that we'd love for you to talk about. So I'm going to share those in the chat, but in addition to having them in the chat, someone is going to come into each breakout room and give you a link to a Google Doc where you can take some notes as you're answering those questions. So it would be great. There's going to be 5 or 6 people in each breakout room. It would be great if one person could volunteer to take some notes in that Google Doc while people are chatting. And we're going to send you off for about 10 or 12 minutes. So I hope that's clear. So again, breakout rooms to have a chat. There's questions that I've put in the chat. There'll also be someone coming to share a Google Doc with you for someone to take notes in your breakout room. So let's open up the breakout rooms now and have a good conversation, and then we'll come back here just to wrap up. Welcome back. Welcome back.
No,
nice to see all the faces.
So.
Okay, I hope you had a nice conversation. I'm going to pass it back over to Étoile for a few comments to wrap up.
Yes, so thank you everyone for joining today. I'm sure maybe the breakout rooms didn't have enough time to cover a lot of, to share a lot of feedback. But this is not going to be the last knowledge sharing webinar. Hopefully, we'll organize more webinars. I would just like to also inform you that the notes from the breakout rooms, if any, will serve as a reference for Aresia to help address some of the key points raised as we move forward throughout the project. Also, we would greatly appreciate if you can take a couple of minutes to fill out the evaluation survey. You'll find the link in the chat. We will also send it to you later by email. I would like to really thank all the guest speakers, Raluca, Tracy, Ryan, Simon, and Santiago for your valuable participation and for sharing your expertise. We hope that the knowledge shared today and all the recommendations will contribute to informed decision-making and help guide the future initiatives to enhance the protection of migrant workers. I would also like to thank the interpreters, Junior and Samuel, and the Aresia team as well, Nadia, Melanie, Yasmin, Jason, and Simone. And I would just finally like to share my screen because in case anyone would like to share any questions or would like to continue the conversation, sorry, just a page for all the resources related to the project, the information also related to our sub-agreement holders. We are currently working on a service map for migrant workers for the Maritimes, and of course we will let you know once this is complete. That's it for me. I would like to thank you again for joining and for participating and for engaging, and hopefully we'll get to see you in another event happening soon. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Raisa, for the moderation. And that's it for today.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.